Thank you, everybody, for coming today to the Chamber of Commerce Legislative Forum, the first one of 2022. So my name is Ian B. I'll be serving as the moderator for the event today. Just kind of outline what's going to happen. First, I'll introduce these gentlemen here in just a second. And then after that, we'll do some opening comments from each of our legislators. They'll have, 3 to 5 to 6 minutes to kind of talk about what's been happening over at the State House. Then after that, we'll move to our Q&A, and then we'll move on to closing comments again from our legislators. And just a little word about our forum format today. So we want to be able to explore specific topics in greater detail through our series of legislative sessions. And so each forum this year is going to have a different set of topics that we'll be covering. So for this month, we're going to be focusing on employment and labor shortage, the tax reform bill, removing income tax, one-time funding requests, and then questions in regard to the Navigator pipeline. And then just a quick word is that to be respectful of our legislators' time, we do want to remind everybody that we'll be ending here at 9 a.m. sharp today. 9 p.m. will be a very long forum. And then also, we would like to welcome any sponsors that we have in the audience, as well as any high school students. And just so you know, our January sponsors are Access Energy Cooperative, Fairfield Arts and Convention Center, Freeman, Kevenides Law Firm, Morrissey Law Offices. And so we'd like to thank our sponsors, 1, for this morning's refreshments, and then 2, for helping to make this event free and open to the public. We would also like to thank any high school students for attending and participating in the event today. And so now, let's get to it. So our senators that we have before you and our representatives that we have before you are Senator Adrian Dickey from Iowa Senate District 41. Hey Adrian, how you doing?
Great, thank you. Happy to be here.
Excellent. Representative Joe Mitchell from Iowa House District 84.
Okay. Thank you.
And Representative Jeff Shipley from Iowa House District 82. Alrighty, so we will let each of you guys talk here for a little bit, just some opening comments about your experiences thus far for the legislative session of this year. So, Senator Dickey, since you are closest to me, I will let you go first.
Well, thank you. Really, what I've really been working on the last, we're going into the 4th week of session already, which is just absurd to comprehend that. It's crazy how fast January's gone up there. But the things that I'm really involved with are really the kind of the key topics for today. I'm chairman of the Senate Labor and Business Relation Committee, and so pretty much since I'd say almost even last April, I started working on a reemployment bill and spent most of that time visiting with businesses and people and different groups and associations on the labor needs that we have in the state. That's been pretty in depth. It's something our committee that's been our number one focus, and we'll probably drop that bill Monday or Tuesday of next week. So between that and then I'm also in Ways and Means, which is dealing with the tax plan that we just dropped Wednesday night, I believe, and then Transportation Committee. So Transportation so far has been kind of quiet. Haven't had a lot going on in transportation yet this session, but the other two definitely have dominated the time, and I won't speak any more about them now because I'm sure they'll be up for topic later this morning.
All right, thank you so much. Representative Mitchell, your opening comments.
Yeah, well, thank you, Ian, for moderating this discussion this morning, and thank you all for being here this morning. It's great to have conversations with our constituents about the issues that are important to you guys, and be able to be here and be a communicator to let you guys know what's going on at the State House this year. And looking forward to the discussion with Representative Shipley and Senator Dickey. And so, first of all, the committees that I serve on at the State House, I think that's important to know that the topics that we're talking about today are relevant to what I work on the daily up there. So I'm on the Ways and Means Committee, which is the Tax Committee. I'm on the State Government Committee. I'm on the Commerce Committee, Judiciary, and the RIF Budget Committee. So a lot of these issues that we're going to be talking about today pertain to the committees that I serve on and a lot of the bills that I work on as well. So number one, as we pointed out, taxes is going to be a big issue this year. Obviously the governor, that was, her main, her main initiative when she came out in her State of the State address. That's also going to be a number one initiative for House Republicans and I believe Senate Republicans as well. And so that's going to be a bill that's going to be worked on heavily, trying to reduce the burden for everyday Iowans to pay less in taxes. And with what's going on right now with the economy and inflation, I think it's vital to be able to give you back more of your hard-earned money and let you make the decisions on where that should be spent. The other thing that obviously we're going to talk about today is workforce. And so just met with a group of business leaders here in Fairfield yesterday, and that was their biggest concern. It wasn't even taxes, it was workforce. They're concerned about taxes as well, but we got to be able to have bodies here. We got to have people that can do the job and show up on time and be able to be productive workers. And so that's something that we're going to be heavily focused on this year, and looking forward to talking about that later today. And then housing is another one that goes right alongside workforce. We got to figure out how to get affordable housing to our communities, specifically here in Southeast Iowa and places like Fairfield. And then education as well, striking a balance between funding our public schools here, which do a great job, but also giving parents choice. So those are the things that I'll be focused on, and that I'm looking forward to having some discussions later on today. Thank you.
Excellent. And then Representative Shipley, what would you like to share?
Well, good morning. Thank you, Ian, for hosting, and thank you to the Chamber of Commerce and all the generous sponsors for making this possible, and certainly all of you for taking time out of your Saturday morning to be here. So it is important that we show up, take ownership of our government. There are a lot of important issues to discuss, a lot of serious challenges facing our community. First, I just want to recognize and congratulate everyone on how far we've come over the course of this pandemic the last 2 years. We've really actually fared very well compared to a lot of other places, even compared to Ottumwa. Wapello County, Jefferson County looks a lot better in a lot of these health outcomes. So we truly do have a lot to be thankful for, and I think that's very important that we focus on that which we've done well and that which we have to be thankful for. So first, just thank you all for staying healthy and taking personal responsibility to make the best of these very historic and challenging circumstances. The most urgent need to address as a community is our mental and emotional health and our spiritual health. There are a lot of people suffering. It's not just anxiety and depression. We have an epidemic of loneliness, a crisis of identity, a lot of confusion, a lot of grief. When we look at all the stress and the trauma wreaking havoc in society, now whether this trauma manifests itself in substance abuse and addiction, or simply just falling short of where we know we could be, I think at this point in time, it would really behoove us to take some time to heal, to be honest with ourselves, to be honest with one another, take a deep breath, step back and take a look at the bigger picture of our lives. And forums like this really are important because truly, we really all do want the same things. Certainly everyone in our community, but also around the world. We're after peace, stability, a feeling of community, opportunity, to be treated with dignity. And again, we are also connected worldwide. So over the last couple weeks, this discussion has begun to emerge in the city of Fairfield. It's been a little bit rocky. I'm talking about some of the city council discussions we've had in Fairfield lately. And we see that there's a lot of things to talk about, a lot of things that are really, really important to people that are very consequential over the course of their lives. And so I've been very pleased to see the progress and people beginning to talk about those things. Obviously, there's a lot of gaps to bridge, but I mean, the more that we can show up in good faith and expect the best of one another and see the best in one another, I think that's what we really need to focus on as a community. So I think this will be an ongoing discussion, and I'm certainly very thankful any part I can play in that. I do want to mention how we are also connected worldwide, and I do want to take a quick moment this morning to acknowledge the Canadian trucker convoy that arrived in Ottawa yesterday. These are many tens and thousands of working class people making tremendous sacrifice to confront their government over what they see is an injustice. So when we see that, it really does mean we have to be ever more grateful for what we do have here, that we have a government of the people that respects the people, respects the will of the people. And my goal for the state of Iowa is simply just to be so overwhelming and overflowing abundant in our peace and our prosperity, in our health, in our freedom, that we have plenty to share with our Canadian brothers and sisters. A lot of people don't quite understand how they might be affected by this, but as we're seeing the economic supply chain stress and rising prices, if there are government policies that are preventing the free flow of goods and services across borders, whether it's state borders or international borders, that's going to affect us in Iowa. That's going to extend the supply chain disruptions, and that's going to raise prices over fewer goods. So it's incredibly important that we do support the people in Canada and that we support open, honest, transparent government around the world, because when we have that, it will uplift all our lives. So let's not be naive to big events happening around the world, and it's on us to pay attention to that and hopefully come together as a community, pray, and set a good example. Another big area of my legislative work, which overlaps on this, has been applying the Iowa Civil Rights Act, again, which has been very much talked about in Fairfield the last couple of weeks, and basically understanding how the law applies to some of the unique COVID-era challenges that we're seeing in our society, and hopefully making our laws overwhelmingly clear so that we can never, ever get close to the point where Canada is. And that's going to take a lot of work. So I certainly appreciate everyone's help in making that dream come true for the state of Iowa, and I certainly look forward to some great discussion and all your questions today. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, all of you. So now we will turn to the Q&A, and so we have a microphone set up back there to my left, probably your right, depending on where you're sitting. And so what we'll do is we'll actually have folks line up behind the microphone if you do have an interest in asking a question for our legislators here today. Just kind of some quick notes on how we're going to approach that. So for one, we want to encourage a variety of questions and want to be sure that we have the time to answer as many questions as completely as possible. So as you wait for your turn, if someone in front of you asks a very similar question than the one that you were thinking of, feel free to move on down your list, ask a different question if you have a different one in your mind, have that question ready when your turn is up. And then in an effort to answer as many questions as possible, I'd also like our legislators to know if you guys can stick to a rough timeline of 2.5 minutes in your responses per legislator, that would be excellent. And then lastly, of course, a quick reminder is that our topics for this legislative forum are employment and labor shortage, the tax reform bill, removing income tax, one-time funding requests, and questions in regard to the Navigator pipeline. And then as a thank you to our sponsors, if there are any sponsors that are looking to ask a question that have lined up, we do invite you to go first here. And then if not, we will just proceed with the first person up there. And so as you ask your question, please just let us know what your name is, and then if there is like an organization or a business that you're asking the question on behalf of, please let us know what that organization or business would be.
Thanks very much, Ian. I'm here as a citizen of the realm. I am an active member of the Southeast Iowa Sierra Club. And it was mentioned just a second ago, Jeff, thanks for bringing it up, that legislators are obligated by oath to honor the will of the people. In 2010, Iowa voters approved the Natural Resources and Outdoor Recreation Trust Fund. That was to be funded by a sales tax. 12 years later, that fund is still not funded. This is something that the people of Iowa asked the legislature to get done. So when we're talking tax reform, I hear a lot of talk about cutting taxes. I would like to ask all of you to please be sure when you go back to Des Moines that that initiative, that fund gets funded this year. Happy to take questions on it if you have any questions for me.
Gentlemen, any thoughts?
I'll take a stab at it, Patrick. Well, one, thanks for being here. Great question. So, yeah, the voters in 2010 approved the creation of an outdoor recreation trust fund for the first 3/8 of a penny the next time the sales tax was raised. We haven't seen the sales tax raised in the last 10 years, is my understanding, and that's why the fund has not been funded yet. Pre-pandemic, if people can think back to January and February of 2020, the governor was going around the state trying to promote this idea, trying to advance that. I, for one, am a big supporter of outdoor recreation. I think there's a lot of wonderful things that we can do. Certainly in Van Buren County, yeah, it's good, wholesome, family fun, shows the best of what our state's all about. I guess the first thing I had come to my head is really just reanalyzing what we're looking at sales tax. I think what we're trying to accomplish this year is an across-the-board tax cut. But when we look at revenues, I still think there is a lot of room to explore. So for instance, we recently passed the SAVE sales tax penny for school infrastructure. Well, then the pandemic came and we totally revolutionized and rethought the way we look at school infrastructure. So I think as long as the legislature can remain and keep a flexible and ever-evolving approach on how we're looking at these revenues, I think we could easily squeeze out 3/8 a penny, if not more. Now, there's a lot of, the other problem is a lot of legislators will disagree on exactly the funding formula and how much you go to trails, how much you go to water cleanup. I think Senator Rosenboom's retiring, so we'll see who else has ideas on that. But those would be my thoughts to share with you, and I encourage you to keep engaged and certainly appreciate the thoughts in the conversation.
Thank you, Jeff. Any?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can answer this as well. I mean, my thoughts are very similar to Jeff's. I was supportive of the governor's Invest in Iowa Act. Obviously, I do think we should fulfill that commitment to the voters. If we do raise that penny sales tax, but again, it seems like this year that's not necessarily the focus as it was maybe 2 years ago, pre-pandemic. But I think it's obviously something I've heard about, quite a bit. And if that conversation gets brought up again, more than happy to look at supporting a piece of legislation like that. But again, this is a different piece of tax policy that was brought forward this year. Philosophically, I'm okay with, I think consumer taxes are a lot fairer to folks than income taxes. And that was the governor's proposal 2 years ago, was to raise that penny sales tax and then be able to commit that funding to the recreational trust fund and then use the rest of that revenue to cut people's income taxes. But obviously this year's a bit different proposal that she has that doesn't necessarily address that issue.
In the Senate tax plan that we just released a couple days ago, and I won't go that into depth, I'm sure we'll bring that up later, but I bring that up because part of our tax plan deals with the lost money. Local option sales tax, excuse me, I'll try not to use acronyms. In our plan, we are not raising the statewide sales tax. We're just solidifying it at a 7% across the board. There's over 1,000 taxing entities in the state. I think all but 46 have the local option sales tax in place. A bit of the problem with that is because there's so many different taxing entities and so much of our commerce anymore is done online, there's a lot of online retailers that don't collect that extra cent for the communities. Because the onus is on those communities that have that in place to go collect it if they haven't collected and submitted it. In our tax plan, it solidifies that 7 cents is basically across the board from the state, but that one penny goes directly back to the communities that have that in place. So the state's not taking it. We're not raising the sales tax. We're just basically solidifying it in code. So some of that revenue is not lost, but the communities that have their local option sales tax, the funding will still be the same. It will go back to them. Part of that 1% or that 1 cent or the 7 cent sales tax is triggers for the outdoor recreation. The outdoor recreation trust fund. And part of that also is that formula. I think it was 2010 you mentioned. That formula is to be updated. 12 years have passed. There's some reasons why that trigger has not been met or hit, and it's going to be updated so those fundings get in place a bit easier than what they were when they was originally established.
Right. Thank you all for your responses. And what I would ask is, Adrian, I think you're right. It's probably time to update that formula. There may be better ways than 3/8 of a cent for the next sales tax raise to actually get the trust funded. So if you would, be nimble, be creative, and look for ways to get it done. This is something that voters asked for quite a while ago. Thank you.
Thank you. All righty.
Hey, my name is Ed Hipp. I am here on behalf of golfers. My wife and I run the golf range and the golf course, Royal Dandelion. So fortunately, Dal and I do all the work at our range, so we're not as interested in this issue personally that I want to ask a question about. What's causing the labor shortage? I'm suspicious about the impact of the various kind of mandates on it and the various kind of payments that come from the government. When I went to True Value one time, they said they were restricting their operation because they couldn't get any help. And she went on to say, the clerk, that she could make twice as much from the government not working as she could make working. So if you guys could say whether you think how the mandates are affecting employment and how the government payments or any other thing that you think is causing this labor shortage. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm more than happy to answer that question, and I think you hit it right on the head. The government's doing no favors to us right now, mostly the federal government on these restrictions they put in place and the mandates they put in place. We had a massive workforce shortage before the pandemic, and then the pandemic hit, made it twice as worse. And now we have a federal government that's in there that's putting mandates on healthcare workers, and luckily, the Supreme Court struck down the OSHA mandate for folks that weren't healthcare workers. But besides that, you're also paying folks to still stay home and not work for up to 26 weeks here in the state of Iowa. And so that's going to be, one of our main initiatives this year, as well as unemployment reform, which Senator Dickey's taking the lead on in the Senate. So I know he can go more in depth on that. But again, there's no reason that if you're let off from work today, they can't find another job tomorrow. And if you can't find one, come to me, because I got a couple hundred jobs in Mount Pleasant, another couple hundred jobs here in Fairfield that'll pay $18, $19, $20 an hour with full benefits. And so, I think when we look at what's going on, obviously we have a bodies problem. For the past 3 or 4 years since I've been in the legislature, I don't think we've, really came to that truth that, really what we need is we need people here, right? We need people that are willing to go work. A lot of the solutions that are put forward is, well, how can we educate people more and train them more in things? Well, that's great. But a lot of the folks here and a lot of the employers here in Fairfield and Mount Pleasant and in Van Buren, they just need somebody to show up to work on time and pass a drug test and, do the job. And so, one of those initiatives I had 2 years ago was I said, let's look at places, around the U.S. where folks are leaving and where are they going to. So Puerto Rico being one of those places. Obviously, people from Puerto Rico are U.S. citizens, but they have a lower standard of living in Puerto Rico, and so there's people living in droves, tens of thousands a year, and going to Florida and going to places like Texas, for various reasons, and that's where jobs are. And I said, well, let's use the IDA to go down and try to recruit folks from different U.S. territories to come to Iowa to live and work. But I think a lot of times, and both state government, most certainly, and federal government, folks don't like to think outside the box, and they don't like to be innovative, and they don't like to be entrepreneurs, and that's a problem in government in general. And so, that's something I've been talking to Senator Dickey about, potentially proposing that initiative again. But, with some of these proposals to, get more folks here, we haven't explored those options before, so people aren't open to it. And again, that's just a problem with, how government works in general, is getting things through to people of, innovative new ideas that could work to bring more people here. But, at the end of the day, it's a bodies problem. We got to get more people back to work. And I think, the unemployment reform we're going to do is going to be, an initial thing that we can do that's, more, right now that we can do. But in the long term, we have to be able to think of creative solutions to be able to get, more bodies here in the state of Iowa, folks that want to, live here and work here and raise a family.
Great question. as Joe mentioned, before the pandemic, we've had a major labor issue in the United States, especially in Iowa. Pandemic obviously just amplified that by how many factors. And it was spurred, in my opinion, largely because of all the federal subsidies and handouts and this and that. I mean, we waived home mortgage payments and tuition payments, and we had unemployment payments and extra federal unemployment benefits, and you know, I mean, just everywhere you turn around, there's another check coming in the mail, it seemed like, and there was no incentive to work. You know, a lot of the Gen Z demographic gets, I think, wrongly labeled as the group of, you know, these 20-somethings, 20-year-olds that aren't going back into the workforce, and there's some truth to that. But a lot of that, the workforce shortages, we're finding that, you know, people 55 to 65, you know, groups of people that were, you know, kind of looking at retirement down the road, or, you know, it was in the future, it was really close. And then this hit, and they may have been sent home for whatever reason, unemployed, laid off for a short period of time for the pandemic, and they realize that, you know, their home's paid off, they don't need a new pickup every year, they don't have to go out to eat 4 times a week, they can kind of restructure their budget a little bit, and maybe they don't need to go back to work for a while. How long can we, you know, wait this out? And there's nothing wrong with that. You know, there's a group of people like that aren't necessarily not returning to the workforce because of a government handout, but just they're looking at their life a little bit differently. And so there's several key things why the workforce shortage is what it is. But you drive around, you see restaurants closed, you know, you see McDonald's limited hours, or, I mean, everywhere. I mean, when you see chain restaurants closing because they can't get work, manufacturing, health, you know, and my business with trucking and transportation, you know, we raise, this is just absurd to think about it. Typically, as an employer, when you have a labor issue or any issue, one solution is throw money at it, right? We increased pay for all of our professional truck drivers 20 to 25% this summer, and not for everybody, but for many people, we saw productivity go down because what they needed to earn in the past, it took them 5 days. Now they can do it in 3 days, and they know I got 25 trucks sitting against the fence empty anyway because we don't have enough employees, so they're pretty confident I'm not going to fire them. So they're saying, you know, I'll come in on Tuesday and I'll see you. I need to be home Thursday. You know, it's as an employer, you sit here and you pull the hair out of your head thinking, how do you fix it? You know, and so that's why this. You know, I mentioned I spent so much time since probably April working on this. I'm not calling it unemployment bill; it's the reemployment bill. You know, I want to reclassify our unemployment division as the reemployment division. We've got to have a different mindset as Iowans on working, because for whatever reason over the years, and it's not just because since the pandemic, but for a period of time, our hard-working Iowan ethic has been diluted. And somehow we've got to get back to that. It is largely a heartbeat. I call it a lack of heartbeats. You know, there's a lot of factors. One of them is lack of people. You know, we lack the amount of people we need for the workforce demand that we have right now. Joe mentioned something that he's worked on, started a couple years ago. You know, as an employer, a year and a half ago, we started to try to bring we've hired 25 professional truck drivers from South Africa. They speak English, they've driven at least 15 years, they have the cleanest driving record that I can come across. It's not because I want to, I can't find the work anywhere else. And again, throw money at it hasn't fixed the problem. But I've been at this process for a year and a half. It's typically the visa process is about a 6-month process. It's about 5 steps, and a year and a half into it, I'm on step like 2. It's red tape federal government. You know, they don't see the need. They don't have the desire to try to fix it either. So I'll stop there. There's much more I'll talk about this labor bill later, but to answer your question, thank you.
Thank you.
So yeah, thanks, Ed. Appreciate your question. The question was, what's causing the labor shortage? I think we've heard a lot of key points. I'll just add a couple more thoughts. So yeah, we have a demographic problem. Just in general, rural Iowa is an aging population. In general, people are getting married later in life and having fewer children. So this is kind of a problem that's been generations in the making. We're on the cusp of what they're calling the fourth industrial revolution, which basically we have a very highly specialized and vastly distributed international division of labor. And it's done wonderful things to bring our prosperity up to levels never thought imaginable. I think the iPhone's a great example of this. Designed in California, assembled in China, does everything that would have been unimaginable 20 years ago. But again, I think as we're seeing the stress play out, it might be time to take a step back. And while we have a lot of things to be thankful for, let's get back to the basics. I think one of the most important things we're seeing in our local economy is a lack of skilled trades. And I think the biggest difference or contributor to that is we've been hitting these high school kids, just drilling it in their heads that they have to go to college. That, a career like being a plumber or an electrician somehow isn't as dignified as sitting around in an office or something. And so I think just the way we've approached post-secondary education and skills, trades, apprenticeships, I think if we would have, and just an example of this, when I was in high school, they had a building and trades class where the high school students would go and build a home. There's still a lot of programs like that, but they're seeing fewer enrollments, and some of the programs are disappearing and needing help. And we have a large glut of housing stock that really needs a lot of tender, loving attention. So clearly to me, these problems are related. And so I think if we can, again, just cultivate a good positive spirit of hard work, of personal responsibility by adolescence, certainly by puberty. I think that's what we really need to do, because there also is a morale crisis too. Again, with the pandemic, we saw a tremendous different approach to how people were viewing work and employment. And there are a lot of people who are sitting in jobs that they don't like, and they don't really do a good job. They don't put their heart into it. They don't take pride in their work, and it's going to drag down the whole economy. So a lot of key issues here. They all kind of contribute together. I would love to go on a rant about how, well, never mind, I'll save that for later, but there's a lot more I could talk about, and it's a very important issue, so hopefully we got this discussion started this morning.
Thanks a bunch.
Hello there, what's your question?
Hello, my name is John McCurley, and I'm on the school board here. What I would like to know is how we can be assured that that we're going to begin, that with this new tax plan, that there's not going to be a fiscal crisis in public education or in our community colleges or our Regents institutions where the graduates go. Are we going to see unstable funding? Well, I mean, and let me back up and say, we desperately need more than the 2.5% that we've been getting in the last few years. We desperately need to make up for the cuts of the last decade, but there doesn't seem to be any will within the legislature to do that. And I'm quite concerned that with this new tax proposal, that the stability of even the limited funds that we've been provided with is going to evaporate. And as I say, right, it's part of a continuum with higher education in the state. Are we going to see increases in tuition at the Regents institutions, at the community colleges, as a consequence of the fact that we won't have the resources to be able to provide to those institutions? Thank you very much.
Yeah, I can take that one. So to answer your first question, I would say I've been a fairly strong advocate of public schools in general in our area. The vast majority of the public schools, in our area, and I was just at the Fairfield Community School District yesterday with Superintendent Knoll, taking a tour through there and talking to her about the issues that she perceives are going to be coming up here in the near future. Obviously, the first thing that we do every single legislative session is take care of the SSA's funding, because that's important to our school boards to be able to plan for that next year and make sure that their budget is intact and they can plan for the future. And so, again, I've always been a larger advocate of giving increases to our public schools, which I think for the vast majority of them do a really good job. Another thing that I've been a champion on is IJAG, which is the Iowa Jobs for American Graduates, which is a public-private partnership, that is a program that we put in Mount Pleasant schools. We're going to be hopefully putting it here in Fairfield schools here soon to help kids be able to explore, careers and be able to get background on different industries that they can potentially go into after high school, and they get credit for that as well. And so largely have been an advocate for our public schools and bringing more programs, to there. But again, I'm, pretty positive that we're not going to necessarily have, a big educational crisis. We have given over $1 billion in new money in the last decade to public schools. We're going to give another $150 million in an increase this year. So I think when we talk about percentages, 2.5% might not sound like a lot, but it's $150 million new dollars. And so, I think that's, need to put that in perspective. Over 50% of our budget for the whole state goes to education. So I always tell people, if you want to see where our priorities are as a legislature, you need to look at our budget, and our budget is clearly 100% geared towards education and caring about our students. But to also, hit on the point about, our regent universities, University of Iowa still has the lowest tuition in the Big Ten. And so when you compare us to, other colleges, around, the Midwest in our conference, we still have, very low tuition rates. So I think, this idea that, we don't fund education enough is that's not clearly true. I think if certain folks, had their way, then it would be completely gutted, which would be really bad. But I think for the most part, most folks that are in the legislature, they understand that, our public education is very good here in Iowa, and that, we're not intending on defunding it, which we haven't, because we've given over $1 billion in new funding to public education in the last 10 years. So.
I said here, when you asked the question, a bit of a pause, trying to think, no offense, but what do you mean by limited funds? I mean, as Joe just mentioned, half of our state budget goes to education.
Would you like me to tell you what I mean by limited funds?
Half of our state's budget goes to education. Education saw more money thrown at them this past year from the federal government that they're trying to find ways to spend it. There's, I think every aspect of our lives, we wish we had more money. We could all do more with more, right? But that's not always possible. Yes, we're sitting on some surplus, and that surplus is something we promised to these taxpayers in the state of Iowa.
You're sitting on surplus because you stole that money from our institutions. You defunded our institutions. That's where that money came from, as well as the federal government. Be truthful, at the very least.
We disagree, because I do not see where we stole money from the institutions, sir. But I'll go ahead and finish with my comment in that.
Be truthful, simply truthful. I know it's really difficult for this legislature, but try.
I will stop. I'll let you finish everything you need to say, because this is not really a debate back and forth.
I'm here. I was elected in order to try to defend the interests of public education in this district. And so the reason I'm angry, the reason that I'm speaking to you like this and refusing to allow you to get around the question, is because I'm trying to do my job, because you aren't. And not only are you not, but you are about to fundamentally change the tax character of this state in ways that are for generations going to make my job and the job of everyone who comes after me that much more difficult. And the fact that you can't even be honest about it is profoundly frustrating. And the idea that you gave 0%, don't smirk.
I'm not smirking.
0% to the University of Iowa this year. That's a decrease because costs go up. The same thing when it comes to public schools. Costs go up. And I'm tired of the lies where you say, oh, well, the total amount is increasing. Well, increase the amount that we can spend in our general fund. That's the relevant amount. And you lie to people who don't understand school finance in order to get around that.
Well,
Jeff, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate your passion in this topic. I would encourage you not to cast aspersions on those who think differently. I don't think anyone here is lying to you. I think what Joe said is absolutely correct. Over the last 10 years, we've devoted $1 billion new dollars to education. And when you include...
You don't feel it, Jeff.
Excuse me, may I finish? May I finish?
Sure.
Thank you. So I think it's, when you add the property tax revenue, that's another $1 billion that's been added to public education over the last 10 years. Funding for public education is at historic all-time highs, and if you're not,
In total dollar amount, it doesn't.
if he's not able,
Can you let them talk?
Yes. So, yes. Thank you, John, for your passion. But yeah, I would like to see and hear from our representatives and kind of let them finish their statements as well.
Well, if they would speak truthfully, I wouldn't interrupt them.
We're,
Got his mic.
we are not, yeah.
No,
and I think, yeah. No, but this really is an illustrative point. And what I was going to say is if you've gotten $2 billion new dollars over the last 10 years, and if funding is at all-time historic highs, and if you just got bailed out at the federal government level for shutting your schools down, if that equals a financial crisis to you, then you are the problem. Okay? Now, when I'm talking about school funding, what's most important for the legislature to do is to set state law. Now, House File 802 prohibits the use of critical race theory texts and divisive context in the classroom. Your 8th grade social studies teacher decided not to follow that state law. When we wrote a law banning mask mandates in school, your district decided to follow a federal judge. So if you want more funding, maybe you should go to the federal judge for more funding. If you're going to want the legislature to fund you, I can't in good conscience follow any institution that's not going to follow state law. That's what our parents expect. Parents are beyond frustrated right now that they have to send their kid to school and be indoctrinated by why being a white person is a bad thing. Read stamp from the beginning, Zibram X Zendi, the most prominent critical race theory person in the country right now is in your 8th grade classroom in violation of Iowa law. I am not going to I'm not going to spend a single dollar on an institution that is not going to follow Iowa law. Now further, you bring up the public universities. As a graduate of University of Iowa, that has been one of the best decisions we've made because after we clipped their funding, we've had great relations with the university. They've behaved very, very well on a lot of these policy decisions, and the University of Iowa performed better on COVID than a lot of their Big Ten counterparts, and that's because of actions the legislature took. So yes, the school board derives their power from the Iowa legislature. I'm more than happy to fund institutions. I'm more than happy to fund public education. I would love a 5% SSA as long as that money went to the students directly, that the parents had their fair say in how those funds were directed, and that all the institutions followed state law. I don't think that's too much to ask. So thank you for your passion this morning.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Senators. Thank you, Representatives.
Good morning. My name is Margaret Dwyer. This is a question about labor force. I heard all the interpretations that you provided about why we have a labor shortage, and I agree with many of them, and I respect your opinions. I'm startled, puzzled, that no conversation came up about minimum wage. Senator Dickey, you happened to provide last year, I think, or last session, a bill to upgrade the payments for our first responders. And it was long overdue and it was very much needed. And I appreciate that you did that. I think minimum wage should be treated the same. These things need to be updated and go up every couple of years, and it hasn't been touched in a long time. And it's not, you mentioned that you don't think throwing money at it is the problem, but I do think that in order to get a base level of starter employees who can move up and fill up the labor force at higher levels, we need to make it a little bit more reasonable at the bottom level. And as we all know, $7.25 an hour is not a livable wage. So that's my question is, what are your thoughts? Does minimum wage fall into this at all?
If I can ask, name one job right now that pays a minimum wage.
Fair enough.
Thank you. That's my point. It's not an issue right now because it's just not an issue. If you're making minimum wage, I just can't imagine anybody right now making minimum wage, and if you are and you want to improve from that, walk 3 feet down the sidewalk and you'll find a job that's paying much more than that because of the issues that we have. You said we laid out all the reasons why we were having problems with workforce. I don't think we came close to laying out all the reasons. We might have scratched the surface with some of the key ones, but the labor issue right now, minimum wage, I mean, that's not even a discussion for me right now. It's so irrelevant. The job force right now is dictated what wages are, and it's well above minimum wage.
If someone is making under $15 an hour right now, please contact them or have them contact me, because I can find them a job over $15 an hour and anywhere in this area.
So do you think that we should continue to even have minimum wage?
I ain't thought about it. No, I would. Are you saying should we get rid of minimum wage? No, I would not say that. I'm just saying today's environment, it's not even a topic.
Right, but if we have it, it should work. That's all I'm saying.
Okay.
And the free market's working right now, and that's why people are getting paid $18, $19 an hour with a GED to have an entry-level job.
Thank you.
I got another twist to put on this question. I appreciate it, Marg, because it is interesting. As wages are increasing, are people really feeling like they're getting ahead? Are people feeling like they have money to set aside and save for their children or their future? And I think more often, no. And we are seeing prices of consumer goods, of necessary goods, energy, things like that, energy and food, also rising with wages. It's very interesting because when we, again, take that big picture look back, one of my favorite things to talk about, and maybe some of you have heard this before, the minimum wage in 1963 was $1.25. But back then, quarters were 90% silver. So if we had the exact same minimum wage of 1963 of $1.25, but if we had money that was actually worth something rather than just this paper that the Wall Street bankers have given us, we would $1.25 in quarters, silver quarters today, probably be somewhere 25, 27, maybe approaching $30. So the problem isn't so much the price setting, and I think whenever government comes in and establishes prices, I think that's when you really see economies start to deteriorate. So keep an eye out for that, because Biden might do that in the months ahead. So I think we really need to look at the monetary picture, what has happened to the US dollar and the monetary system of the United States, because that is where you've seen the wealth of the people, the working class, savers, people on fixed income. That's where their wealth has slowly but steadily eroded over time, and I believe it has been to the benefit of the banking institutions that run this country. So that's how I look at the minimum wage.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Who is next?
I guess I am. Hi. I'm Roger Leahy, and I'm the owner of Overland Sheepskin Company. And we employ about 100 people locally and about 200 people nationwide. We have stores in 10 other states, too. And we also, besides production in the United States, we also import from about 10 other countries. And I was kind of, well, frankly, shocked the way not only the COVID affected the country, but the way government intervention in COVID affected the country, and the way it affected our employment, our ability. All of our stores were closed down for several months in 2020, and luckily Iowa was one of the stores that was more liberal, but we have stores in Colorado, and we have stores in other states that were not so liberal. And also I'm concerned about civil liberties too, and the ability of government to tell our employees and our customers and basically just run our business, and the way that the government getting involved in importing and trade wars and stuff has impacted our ability to do business. So, luckily we've been able to sort of navigate through all these things and not been negatively impacted like so many businesses have. I just think it's tragic that I think part of the problem was COVID, and I think, it feels to me like about 3/4 of the problem was what the government reacted or overreacted, or the government thought they had the power to do all these things that basically made the businesses helpless in the face of government overreach. And I'm real concerned about I like what happened in the Iowa legislature last year. I'm sort of familiar with a little bit and what the governor did, and how we came up with some laws that help protect Iowan employers and so forth against federal mandates. And I'm happy with the federal rule that came down because we would have been directly impacted by the mandating our employees, because we have over 100 employees. We would have been directly impacted in having to mandate. I didn't know what I was going to do, because I thought, well, I'm going to have to disobey federal law because I'm not going to make my employees all get vaccinated. I don't think that's my right to do that as their employer, and I don't think it's the government's right to do that as their government, to tell them what to do. But there's still, I understand that all the healthcare workers are still under this federal mandate, and I just wonder what's happening to the healthcare workers in Iowa, and what is the government doing to help them still? And I know Jeff, you were involved in that last year. I don't know if you want to speak to that or anyone else, but I'm really concerned with this thing about government running businesses and telling people what to do with their personal health and all of that sort of thing. I just think this whole civil liberties issue is really extremely important, but it's also economic liberty too, because I don't feel like when the government can tell me what to do or tell my business what to do, that I have personal freedom or economic freedom. So that's my point, and all of you could address that. Thank you.
I'll let Jeff address from the healthcare side, because he's well more abreast than probably most of us in here on that. But I just wanted to comment on, I'm pretty confident it's probably the only time I ever hear in this today's time frame that Iowa being called as liberal. I know what you meant by it, but I just found humor in that. But, I absolutely agree with you. I think most people in this room would agree with your statements, and I'm not being critical of them all. Because I hear that a lot. And I look at this view much more as being a business owner than I do as a legislator, okay? But I also don't want to be hypocritical of myself, and I reminded, go back to when all this started. We were all, hindsight's 20/20, right? We can go back and look at what we did 2 years ago and be very critical of it, because I've done that. But then when I try to put myself back in those shoes 2 years ago, a different mindset. We see things now much different than when any of us saw it 2 years ago. And again, I'm not defending any of the actions that any government from the state or the federal level took, but just want to put a little grain of salt, because what we know now we had no idea about back then. So, but.
Hey, Roger, thanks for being here. Thanks for your speech. A couple of things. Just first, thank you for your willingness to disobey an unconstitutional law, because an unconstitutional law is no law at all. So thank you for your courage and your willingness to even explore that possibility. Thankfully, the Supreme Court agreed with you that time, but there may be a time in the future that the Supreme Court doesn't agree with you, and we'll all have to take a real hard look at our soul and see what do we want to really do. It's been a delicate balance. I do want to congratulate the passage of House File 902, last special session. I want to thank Representative Mitchell and Senator Dickey for getting that done. Basically just clarifying the exemption framework, and that was what was one of the things that was driving people up the wall, is because there was no clear precedent on how civil rights would be applied, or the American Disability Act, or any of these other governing section. I mean, we basically are just making things up as we go along. That's how I characterize the COVID response, is, we saw a threat, no one knew exactly what was going on, and we did our best just to wing it, and here we are 2 months later, and it's again, thankful that so many of us are still alive. But so as far as the healthcare situation, I think House File 902 did protect the majority of the Iowa workforce. There still were a lot of people that felt that they shouldn't be forced or compelled to reveal any medical information at all, and they make a pretty convincing argument that nowhere over the course of their life had they ever been forced or compelled to reveal personal medical details as a condition of employment. So those people refused to reveal their details, they lost their job. But for most people who were willing to go through the exemption process, found relief. Now, in the wake of the CMS mandate, the different hospitals are doing it differently. I'm following up with Jefferson County Health Center next week to see how they're approaching it. But from initial conversation with their CEO, I think they're going to be in a position to really respect their employees and have policies that make health sense, that are sensible, that are easy to comply with, that actually are effective. But we are seeing some health. The one I've been dealing with is Compass Spirit, who manages a lot of the Mercy affiliates, including Van Buren and Davis County. And unfortunately, on February 7th, they're enacting protocols that, again, I feel are in violation of state law. And so we'll be challenging that before the Civil Rights Commission. So it's still very touch and go. It feels like the dust has settled a little bit, but there are still some nurses, some healthcare workers, there's some other nursing home residents, staff people out of Indianola that are having similar complaints. So we're still cleaning up, but again, I am thankful that so many Iowans took part in this discussion. I'm so thankful that so many healthcare workers were beating down our doors last September, last October, begging for the state of Iowa to take action, and I'm certainly thankful for Governor Reynolds and her leadership and all the Republican legislators and even the Democrats who voted for that bill as well. It was House File 902 was a bipartisan piece of legislation to protect Iowans from Biden's vaccine mandates, and I'm very happy we got that accomplished. So thank you.
And I just want to thank all of you for your work in that
Yeah.
regard. Thank you.
Well, and I want to touch on this again too, and both of what Representative Shipley and Senator Dickey said are absolutely correct. And my thing is, I think what Senator Dickey said about hindsight's 20/20, it is. But I mean, even at the time, 2 years ago when this was all first happening, I thought it was completely crazy that we were letting the government, whether it be state or federal, shut our businesses down and tell us when we could and could not go to work or the grocery store or whatever else. And so I don't think I'll see in my lifetime again, I hope not, where we have a situation where we completely shut down the economy and shut down our daily lives and have the government dictate what we can and cannot do. But I think the other obviously mistake we made, and we've talked about today, is we made people dependent on government. And we're still seeing that today. And that started out with the stimulus checks, went on to the endless unemployment that we're still seeing, and then onto the mandates, which, a year and a half ago when folks were running for office, when certain people who weren't in power at the time but were campaigning said that we'll never have a vaccine mandate, but then came in and did the exact opposite, did the exact 180 and lied to the American people. I think you have to look at that for what it is. And I think the current administration is extremely incompetent. And I think that we do have to have checks and balances in place. But I think what you've seen with the courts, for the most part, is the system does work. Obviously for healthcare workers, that system has not worked correctly as of yet. But for millions and millions of Americans that aren't healthcare workers, the Supreme Court did pull through and struck down the unconstitutional mandate with OSHA, having to require the vaccination. So, again, I think for the most part, we have checks and balances in place for a reason in the Constitution, and it's worked for the last 250 years. And so I still have faith in our system that will still work, and I think we've learned a lot, from the pandemic.
Thank you.
I'm Bob Wall with the American Legion. I am the department commander for the state of Iowa. American Legion is the world's largest veterans service organization in existence today. I know we were up on the Hill January 19th presenting our legislative priorities. I think probably each and every one of you got a sheet of our priorities. And one of my biggest concerns on that, and with Representative Mitchell with the workforce development stuff, it takes me back to the home base Iowa. It's a great program.
Yeah, wonderful.
And the biggest problem that we have as veterans is just left me, where we give the grants for bringing veterans in to help them buy their homes if they will come and live and work in Iowa. It's a great program. It works. The biggest problem is appropriations. We made a wonderful program, but we just didn't give it enough money to let it work. We run out of money probably within the first 2 months of the year to try and draw these veterans in to come back to Iowa and work, and we run out of money to help them. Then we say, well, you get on a list for next year. Well, how many, I don't care whether it's a veteran or who's going to wait 10 months to find a job to try and buy a home with? So we, for the last 3 years, I know anyway, we have been up there on the Hill and asking for an increase in that appropriations on that. I think they give us $1 million, and it's never, and we run out of it very shortly every year.
Could we talk afterwards? Because I'd like to definitely get some more ideas as to the dollar amount that you're thinking. Not to cut you off at all, and I'll let you finish, but I didn't. because I'm working on a bill right now for the same type of thing, for bringing people out of state in just to increase our workforce pool. And I would so much rather do something to help the veterans on doing the same accomplishment than the bill that I'm working on. So
Okay, sure.
please,
Be
let's
glad
talk.
to. Thank you.
And thank you for, we all thank you for your service and what you're trying to do.
Yeah, Bob, I'd reiterate the same thing that Senator Dickey said. I'd love to talk to you afterwards and be educated more on that specific program and see what we can do to get some additional appropriations in, because I think that's a wonderful idea to be able to get more folks back here and that we know they're hardworking because they're veterans. So,
I guess my point that I was trying to make is we come up with good programs, but good programs don't work if we don't fund them.
yeah.
No, so not all programs are created equal in my view too. So I think that probably is the important work that the Appropriations Committee does, is really sorting and sifting through where is the highest and best use for these public dollars, because I think some of the things the state does has negative value. So anyway, just appreciate all that, and thanks for being here. We'll get it done.
All right, thank you guys. Next up.
Good morning. Joe Ledger. I'm on the Jefferson County Farm Bureau Board, but I'm also a concerned taxpayer. Thank you for being here this morning. I've been reading about the governor's tax proposal, and I just wondering what your thoughts are on it, and if you're hearing any rumblings up there about the chances, or if you're going to tweak it, or what's going on. I'm just want a little information on it.
I think the Senate's being a little bit more aggressive, so I'm with them.
Yeah.
I'll go through a few talking points I haven't talked about in our tax plan, and it mirrors a lot of the governors. We are probably a little more aggressive. I will say it is our goal in the Senate to get Iowa to a 0% personal income tax state. That is thank you. That is something we are, I would say, determined to do that. It's but before you can get to zero, you kind of got, if you follow the states that have done this and have been successful in doing it, because there's ways you can do it that backfires. I think Kansas is an example of it. But to get to zero, you got to get to a flat tax first, and the steps that we've laid out is doing that. It's taking Iowa to a 3.6% income tax. And some people will say, well, that's, for a lower income, Iowans, I think if you make roughly less than $22,000, you're paying 0% income tax already. And some people have interpreted that as a tax increase on them, and that's not the case. My numbers may be off a little bit, but if you're paying 0% up to $22,000 now, that stays in place. It won't be an increase on the lower incomes by any means. But Iowa right now is the 8th highest tax rate in the country in personal income. Our plan will take us to the 4th lowest. The surpluses we're sitting on, it's your money. We made a promise to get it back to you. It's your money. We're funding things. We want to get that back to you, but that model also shows that when you have more money, you spend more money, you invest more money, you do more, which continues the cycle that we're seeing. Our plan fully eliminates all taxes on retirement income. We all know people, we all probably have neighbors that go away for the winter, largely because of sun, but largely because of tax reasons. If they say 6 months and 1 day, their income's now, in some states, zero, not taxable. Our plan's hitting that to try to stop that flow. We're driving down the corporate income tax rate. We've got, I think we're ranked in Iowa 48th worst on corporate income taxes. Now, part of that is very deceptive, because part of that is we have a boatload of corporate tax credits. When you factor in the tax credits, it brings Iowa down much, much lower than 48. But what we've went back to the business community, the corporations, say, listen, we're getting rid of the credits and we're bringing down the tax rate. You're not going to have both. We're not going to let you have both. So, we're trying to make it fair for everything. A good example is, I won't pick on any one business, but there's some corporations in Iowa that have a whole lot of credits. And then you look at Hy-Vee, for example, who I think is the largest employer in the state of Iowa, and none of those credits apply towards them, or very, very little, in the scheme of things. So we're trying to make that a bit fair. And again, on retirement income, you know, and the governor's plan, and in the governor's plan, she addressed that retirement income not only for pensions and 401ks, et cetera, are going to be non-taxable, but she's addressed the fact that farmers, many farmers have worked all their life, they've paid off their farm ground, et cetera. That is their retirement plan. So the rent on that will be not subject to income tax. So the governor's, some parts of the governor's tax plan love all of it, right? We've incorporated a lot of her plan into ours. So we're excited about moving it forward.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, so the House plan is extremely similar to the governor's and the Senate's plan. Essentially, we just don't have corporate tax cuts in our plan initially. You know, my personal opinion is that income taxes are unconstitutional. They were in this country for about 140 years. And so I think it's only just that we you know, start going down a path forward where we get to a 0% income tax overall, because you know, again, in my opinion, consumer taxes are a lot more appropriate and fair and constitutional than income tax. You know, but again, when you're talking about you know, what tax cuts are going to be a priority this year for everyone, is what Senator Dickey touched on, which was the retirement income, you know, both for folks that are living on a pension, 401k, but also for farmers that are getting that cash rent, and to make sure that's tax-free as well. You know, the House Republicans' plan right now is a 4% tax, you know, flat tax instead of a 3.6. But I think we all have you know, the same goal in mind. That's to cut Iowans' taxes as much as we can in a responsible manner to eventually get to a 0% income tax here in the near future.
So yeah, last I'll add to the discussion is just, again, another great reason to be thankful to be living in Iowa, that we're having these discussions on how to best return money back to taxpayers and trust them in making their own investments and decisions. A lot of other states don't have that luxury. So I'm thankful to be in the chamber here discussing these things and really building on the great conservative budget sound decisions that have been made over the years to put Iowa in this position. And then just last thing, I had it on my notes earlier, but when we look at the income tax, the states that are seeing the most population growth are Texas, Florida, states without income tax. So circling it back to solving the labor shortage, I think making sure we have the most competitive tax policies to attract an ever-shrinking talent pool is going to be very important in that discussion. So hopefully we can get it done for you this year.
Thank you. I just want to add that I'm at that retirement age, and so I've been looking about this, but I also spend a lot of time in the supervisor's office, and where do we get our money? It has to come from taxes too to pay for things, so we just have to figure out a way to make it work right. Thank you.
One other thing that, you know, when we look at different states and where our tax rate is in comparison to other states, in Iowa, I believe our highest personal income tax bracket is 8.53%, which is higher than most states are surrounding us. But the other part of that is, and this is often gets lost in the shuffle, most other states, you talk about California, California may talk about having a 9% tax rate or whatever, but it kicks in like at, I don't know, please don't quote me, it's like $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 of income. The difference in Iowa, our highest tax bracket kicks in at $77,000. That's like 2 entry-level teachers being at the highest, you know, high-income earners. Well, that's, you know, that's over the years how those things have changed, and those are some of the things we're trying to roll back and make it more fair for everyone. Because I think most of us would all agree that $75,000, $77,000, $78,000 for a 2-person income is not high income.
Yeah, and I think to that point, to add on that as well, is when I talk to most of my business owners, right, that employ a decent amount of folks here locally, you know, they're formed as pass-through businesses, S corps, and so they're paying through their personal income taxes. So, you know, we're talking about lowering the rates for, you know, personal income taxes. You're not just talking about, you know, a cut for, you know, lawyers and doctors and folks that, you know, professionally make a lot. You're talking about business owners that are employing folks to put more money in their pocket, to employ more people and invest more money back into their businesses. So I think that's an important point to realize as well when we're talking about these tax cuts are going to business owners that are employing people in our community and giving them good jobs.
All right, thank you. Next question.
Morning, gentlemen. Thank you all for being here. Appreciate it. My name is Michael Moore. I had a question on the proposed pipelines going through Iowa. I know the Summit and Navigator pipelines are proposed coming through multiple counties, including us. And I've been to a couple of their meetings, and for the most part, what I've found in the group, that there's a lot of concern, especially from past experiences, and specifically for a lot of compaction issues in farmers' fields, lowering their output. And these pipelines are supposed to supposedly benefit our state, but where does that money go? It doesn't come here. It comes here for construction for a couple of months and it's gone. I'm just going to refer to a couple of letters. There's 18 counties now that have opposed the eminent domain feature that these companies have. And I'm reading from one of those counties. And it says that while we understand the careful use of eminent domain may be appropriate in certain cases for public use, public purpose, or public improvement, we also believe that the unrestricted and inappropriate use of eminent domain threatens and undermines private property rights. The use of the government authority to take private property for public use to force property owners to surrender their property rights involuntarily should be limited to projects that serve the entire public. And I can go on, but those are the main points. I wanted to get your responses to these projects and their use of eminent domain.
Well, thank you for the question, Michael. This is a big infrastructure project that affects the whole state. There's really three issues at play here. There's the ethanol industry, there's a use of eminent domain, and then there's the deployment of so-called carbon capture technologies. I think certainly in this state, and certainly with the rising costs of fuel, my job as a legislator, I think, is to support the ethanol industry and however that looks like, to make sure that we can, again, put our crops to the highest value they can use. But I do have a lot of concerns on this project. It's not just the eminent domain piece. This is a big expenditure of money. I mean, these are multi-billion-dollar projects that are going in the ground to sequester liquefied carbon dioxide to store in the ground.
Right.
So a lot to dive in there. I guess my thoughts, and again, I'm having a hard time where to begin because it's a lot that could be said, and I don't want to put my foot too far in my mouth. But my understanding is within the last 6 months, a year, Wall Street banks, at the behest of John Kerry and Joe Biden, have wanting to trap Iowa in the Green New Deal. This is the idea of carbon cap and trade. It's been around for many, many years. It never really gained ground prior to this year because it's basically creating a new financial product, a carbon credit, and then being able to trade and exchange that. So it's really a kind of fictitious financial instrument deployed in the name of environmentalism to kind of put something in front of us to dangle that we can fight over. So it's kind of a trick that these carbon credits are just something that the Wall Street bankers are making up. They're not actually worth anything, but someone else is going to make a lot of money and force us to fight for scraps from their table. But like you said, we've seen it before. I've been out in Libertyville where the Bakken pipeline went in. I've seen those compaction issues. I've seen how it damages the field. I've seen how the company just leaves those people in the dust and doesn't bother to remediate the damage that their pipeline caused. I think the biggest thing that frustrates the public is when business and industry, they always seem like they're one step ahead. By the time these projects are in front of the public or in front of the regulators, it already seems like a done deal. Right. And you can't blame Iowans for feeling powerless. I think we all want a fair shake. We all want a chance at the process. But as I think a lot of people realize, this is big business. There's a lot of power behind it. There's a lot of high-powered lobbyists behind it. One of the lobbyists on the project is the former governor who appointed some of the utility board members. So when Iowans see that, and when they see that same lobbyist getting very involved in the legislature, I can understand why people, well, is eminent domain going to be fairly applied here? Or is this corporation with the power of government going to just trample and run right over landowner rights? And so those are very, very serious concerns. So I'm very confused on the purpose of the project. I'm not sold on the necessity of sequestering carbon. I think the best way to sequester carbon is by planting things, whether it's trees or tall grasses or restoring the native prairie in Iowa that allows the carbon to naturally be drawn down back in the earth by sustained long-term root structures in plants and organisms. I think that's more the carbon sequestration strategy I would prefer. So anyway, I have a lot of concerns. We'll see what's happening. They say it's, you know, maybe a year to break ground on this thing. I don't know. I think the big question is, what is the public good? For eminent domain, they have to demonstrate a public good, and I think that's very questionable in this project. So we'll see what the lawyers come up with, and I think we all just need to say our prayers. And again, I think we need to put landowner rights first and foremost. I think in the instances where a landowner has held out, I think there are ways to re-navigate or reroute a pipeline to accommodate everyone and their property rights. And yeah, there's a lot more I could say, but I think that's good enough for now. And just looking forward to having this discussion with everyone, because it is really important. And I think the last thing we want is to have some landowner sitting across the table. You know, he's trying to defend his Century Farm or whatever, and the corporation saying, this is the best we can give you, and if you don't take it, we're going to use the government to force your land. That's what ultimately what cannot happen in Iowa.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, great question. I mean, this is a very multifaceted question, a very, very complex issue. Jeff, I do want to correct you. The former governor, Governor Branstad, is not a lobbyist for any of the companies. He's an advisor to Summit, but so he's not lobbying any legislators.
I believe his son is. So he's on the board of one of these companies. So.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean they're a registered lobbyist at the Capitol advocating for these issues necessarily and talking to legislators about this. But going on from that issue, you know, I will say that you know, we absolutely do need to, you know, protect landowners' rights. You know, but the other thing is as well is that, you know, eminent domain is put in place, you know, again, for public use or for the public good for different utilities that are put in place. So, you know, you had to have the conversation in which we're having right now is, you know, is this pipeline, you know, for the public good or not, right? And so obviously the argument's going to be that, you know, the pipeline, you know, is for the public good because it, you know, sequesters carbon into the ground, and, you know, it's you know, environmentally friendly, and you know, folks are going to debate the merits of that, if that is true to that extent or not. But I think for the large majority of us, we believe that, you know, a large majority of landowners should agree in each county, you know, to you know, voluntarily agree to these agreements with these companies, you know, before eminent domain is even considered. And I think, you know, these are two different companies, Navigator and Summit. And so to that point, I think that you have to judge them both by how they're approaching landowners. And I think, you know, one is maybe doing a better job than the other. And so I think that, you know, it's on these companies to be able to win over the landowners here and be able to communicate with them and negotiate with them and not bully them when they're coming here to our counties and talking to our landowners.
To be honest, I don't have a strong opinion on the project one way or another yet. I mean, to me, it's before a legislator is getting involved on it, it's several steps down the road before that takes place. I've talked to, you know, I'm in a neighborhood where the last pipeline came through. I've talked to farmers that have said they were happy with the situation, and I've heard some that aren't, you know. So I think a little bit what Joe mentioned was on how the companies handle their process, Summit or Navigator. I think there's a lot to be said about the project and the issue if the landowner's happy or not happy with the process. But certainly see the need at times for eminent domain. Is it abused at times? I'm sure it is. You know, the landowner's rights should never be trampled unfairly, though. I mean, so don't have a strong opinion on it at this point yet.
Thank you. And Yeah, next question. I think this will probably be our last question for the day too.
My name is Tracy Deal. I am part of the Jefferson County Farm Bureau Board, but I'm concerned about the labor shortage and truck drivers. For one, I believe we just someone made it harder to get a CDL. How does that benefit our workforce? We need more truck drivers. Why are we making it more difficult to get a CDL?
Amen.
And healthcare workers have been through a whole lot, and many have left the industry and leaving. Then they're sick, and they get COVID or they get exposure and they can't come to work. So it leaves the people who are working needing to work overtime and more hours, and you're getting 120 hours on a 80-hour pay period. Can something be done to incentivize them to continue or to thank them on their overtime tax? So I know that we're talking about cutting the tax rates. What about immediately for those overtime hours? Because overtime's great. It encourages people to go to work more, right? But then when you tax it, or it bumps them up into a different tax bracket, and these healthcare workers are going, oh, I have to go into work again, I have to cover another shift, and then they just see their paycheck go down and down and down. And then high school workers. Where are the high school kids? How can we get them into the workforce? Because when I see every restaurant along the road hiring and offering $12 an hour, and I walk into those places and I see no high school kids working, it just blows my mind. So $12 an hour in high school? That's amazing. Why aren't these kids out there filling these jobs, getting their work experience? And I think it would help with their mental health as well, to be part of something, to be needed, to be useful, versus not working and doing whatever they're doing. So lots of topics there.
Thank you. I'll jump in on the first two parts, because if I answered all of them, but they can answer the others. CDL, and then on the labor issue. The CDL requirements went in place. Those were requirements, I believe, that were established probably back in 2016. They just kind of got a deferral for year after year after year, and this administration decided not to continue that. So it's something that's really been on the books for a long time. Most of your larger over-the-road trucking companies have been doing that for a long time anyway. It is affecting more the rural, small ag-type industries. I'm vice chair of transportation, and I'm working on a bill, but we're not sure, we haven't found out how we can do it legally yet, on having basically an Iowa-only based CDL that would then allow us to remove that requirement. The requirement on the CD, there's such an issue. For example, it gets very complicated, but in every state, in every state you can have a CDL if you're 18 years old. You can't cross state lines though until you're 21. That's a federal requirement, okay? Because if you use federal commerce, we take money for federal money for roads. We got to follow those guidelines for interstate commerce. So the CDL issue falls into that as well, and I'm looking if we can break out that and have an Iowa-only CDL to exclude them from that. However, with that being said, you can still get an ag CDL, which then you don't have to go through the process you're talking about. It's more temporary. I think it's good for 90 days. You have to go in after that and redo it. But there is an avenue where that's still in play. On my unemployment bill, and we talked a little bit about it earlier, you know, the unemployment system that we have in place right now, to be honest, it hasn't changed for so long. I'm struggling to try to find out when it even went into effect. Mainly the bulk of our unemployment system of 26 weeks, 6 months of benefits. I haven't been able to pin down the exact date yet, but it's back in the farm crisis sometime in the 1980s, okay? That's how long this has really not been looked at. And the bill that I'm drafting says that today's economic structure and climate is drastically different than the farm crisis back in the 1980s. And the economic conditions we may have 5 years from now could be drastically different than what we have right now. So to have an unemployment structure that doesn't adjust to the economic conditions, to me, is just dumb. So currently, if you applied and received benefits, you're going to get 26 weeks, up to 6 months worth of unemployment. To go along with that, you have to do 2 job searches, which are not verifiable. So a lot of people, and this is not knocking on people that truly go in employment and have a desire to go back to work. It's not. But you will see with 26 weeks of benefits, especially in today's culture or climate, business climate, if you're pulling 26 weeks of unemployment, you don't want to go back to work. You're not working very hard to find another job. And that needs addressed, because that means everybody else that's in the workforce is having to pick up and pay for that other individual. And that's not fair to everybody else, okay? Our system for unemployment should be helping somebody when they're down on their luck, absolutely. But it shouldn't be a job for them. An unemployment check should not be their next job, okay? And that's what it's kind of morphed into. So the bill that I've drafted says, it's taking the 26 weeks of benefits and it's moving it to a sliding scale. It's going to be 12 to 16 weeks of benefits based on the economic conditions that we're in right now. If the unemployment level is a certain level, it'll be 12 weeks. If it raises to a certain level, it could go up to 16 weeks. In the event that another COVID happens, in my bill, the governor has the ability to move that to 20 weeks, okay? The 2 job searches. What's magical about 2 job searches a week? I mean, how did they come up with that? Again, it wasn't tied to anything. The bill that I've drafted says that the number of job searches you're going to be required to do is going to be based on the number of jobs available in the state of Iowa. So if there's over 60,000 jobs available in the state of Iowa on a given month, you've got to do 6 or more job searches. If it's 50 to 59,000, you got to do 5. If it's 49,000 or less, you got to do 4 job searches a week. Okay. Again, it's based on the economic conditions that the state's in at that given time. And there's many other parts of it, and lots of in there, again, to encourage people to get back to work, to go find a job. And your next job does not need to be your next career. It just needs to be your next job. You can keep looking for another career. I mean, somebody that did job A and doesn't like doing job A and they want to do something different, they can keep looking, but maybe they need to do job A for a little bit longer until they find what it is that they're looking for. So it's, again, we've just got to physically or fundamentally look how we view some of this stuff differently. And it's not being harsh on people or somebody that's down on their luck. It's not. And my response to that when I do receive that comment is being on unemployment for 6 months, the desire to get them back into the workforce should be, it's helping their livelihood. Because unemployment, you're not really making anything, you're getting by. We should have, the desire as Iowans to want more than just that. So this is hopefully encouraging someone to take that step. So thank you for your question.
And it is 9 o'clock, so I just want to see if Representative Mitchell or Representative Shipley, if you have any brief responses to that question before we wrap up.
Yeah, I can go first, Jeff. And obviously a lot to unpack right there, and mainly I would echo a lot of what Senator Dickey said. But a lot of this stuff when it comes down to the CDLs. It comes down to healthcare workers, unfortunately, a lot of this stuff comes from the federal government. I mean, the regulations that came on, recently. And there's certain things that we can do, from the state level, but they're, voting has consequences. And, this administration that's currently in place is, in my opinion, incompetent. When they see that we already had a shortage of truckers and then they put, strenuous, additional regulations to get into CDL. And then also, again, thank God for the Supreme Court striking down the OSHA mandate for non-healthcare workers at least, because they wanted to make, 75% of the workforce that were truckers, get the vaccine as well, which was not going to happen. And, it's ironic that, back in, 2020, March of 2020, for the most part of the whole year of 2020, healthcare workers were considered to be heroes, and we wanted to thank them all the time. And then as soon as 2021 hit, well, now they're evil people. They don't want to get the vaccine, right? And so, again, we've tried everything, and we're continuing to try things on the state level to, try to give people as much leeway as possible to get exemptions to not get those vaccines. But going on to your question about, teenagers not working, and, for the most part, I think that's a parental problem. If, my parents, their rule was if I wasn't in sports, if I didn't have activities going on, then I had to be working. And so every summer I worked. And, my folks have a manufacturing plant in Wayland, and so my first job was working for my dad's company for minimum wage at $7.25 an hour. And, to address this minimum wage question again, I did not like making $7.25 an hour. So then the next summer I went to the YMCA, got a job for $8.25 an hour. And then the next summer I went to the Boys and Girls Club and got paid $10 an hour. And then eventually got a job at the State House making $13 as a clerk. So again, some of this is, parents have to have their kids go out and do work if they're not doing activities at school and being productive. And, it's a culture you have to foster, I believe, with your children. But then eventually they will be on their own, right? And that's when, that's what we're working on to make sure that people aren't stuck on unemployment. They're going out and they're being productive and being, productive citizens.
Yeah, just last I'll add, I think the student piece of that's probably the most important because, again, those younger ages where you're going to develop your habits and work ethic, and those are your formative years, which will necessarily direct the rest of your life. So maybe we need to look at having some sort of work-study requirement or something to get those kids in the workforce. One of the interesting statistics I haven't heard mentioned yet is we have one of the lower workforce participation rates, which literally means we have more folks sitting on the couch and just staying out of the workforce in other ways. So anything we can do to encourage that as really a basic responsibility. I think a lot of it is life has gotten very easy. There's a lot of sense of entitlement. And yeah, we just have to get to work. And we need to instill that as a value from a very young age and through the whole course of your life.
I want to add to what Jess said on the workforce participation rate, and I thank you because I failed to bring that up, and I actually have that in this bill that has to be referenced by Iowa Workforce Development moving forward on anything that they publish. All we hear about is the unemployment level, right? 3%, whatever it is. But workforce participation rate gives it a much truer picture. Workforce participation rate in Iowa right now, I think, is at 68, 69%, which means 31 or 32% of working able Iowans aren't working. That means they've just left the workforce. Now, some of them are retired, decided to early retirement, whatever. Some of those are college-age students and choosing not to work. But what it's saying is it's the people that could work that are choosing not to, just not falling for unemployment benefits. So the pool that we look at, often we look at that 3% unemployment ratio and think, oh, there's just nobody out there to work. Well, there are. That's just people that are looking, they're claiming benefits. So thank you for bringing that up, Jeff.
Thank you. And yeah, so this is the end of the forum now. So I want to extend a big thank you to Senator Dickey, Representative Mitchell, and Representative Shipley for attending today and answering our questions. I'd like to thank our sponsors again, Access Energy Cooperative, the Fairfield Arts and Convention Center, Freeman, Kevenides Law Firm, and Marissi Law Offices. And I'd like to thank you all for attending today and making this a lively event. And so if you're interested in the next legislative forum, that is scheduled for here at the Fairfield Arts and Convention Center at 7:30 a.m. on Saturday, February 19th. So we look forward to seeing you then. We look forward to seeing you guys then as well. Thank you all.